Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome back. It's the Fantasy Headliners. Your boy Kyle is ready to drop some of that deep diving wide receiver knowledge on you for week 15. The playoffs are here, and maybe you have a bye. If you do, congratulations. I mentioned in my tight end video that the playoffs started this week, and a bunch of people were like, nope, not for me. I've got a bye. So maybe you do have a bye this week. Congratulations on that. If not, we got to get our lineup set and we got to get ready to roll. Hit that like button for me. Subscribe if you're new here to the channel. And we've got all 16 matchups. Nobody on a bye this week. We're going to hit this information quickly. I'm going to get you through all that deep diving knowledge. And then if you need updates or you want to know specific rankings, those will be on the channel before Thursday night football. Let's jump into it. Speaking of Thursday night football, San Francisco and Seattle this week. I'm not a huge fan of this matchup for Brandon Aiyuk. Seattle allows the 6 US fantasy points to wide receivers. Now, the reason I still have him as a start, though, and his X factor is 4, there's no Debo. There's no Debo, and there's no other wide receiver on the roster that is talented as Brandon Aiyuk. Yeah, there's going to be some guys that might get a little bit more targets this week because of no Debo, but it's going to be Brandon Aiyuk, George Kittle, CMC. Those are going to be the guys this week against Seattle. So for me, one thing I want to keep in mind too with Christian McCaffrey, coming out of a short week here where they played on Sunday, now they have to play on Thursday. His knee was already bothering him. Do they try to not really limit, but don't overwork him in this game either? I feel like there's going to be plenty of targets for Brandon Aiyuk this week. He might be a little big play dependent. Even if the targets are there, are they going to be of quality? Brock Purdy looked good last week. Does he keep it up this week against what might be a little bit of a tougher defense? And Lockett and DK Metcalf are going to be starts for me. San Francisco allows almost 30 fantasy points per game to wide receivers. They do have a really good defense. Might be the top defense in the league, but one of the problems when it comes to fantasy points is that they get up on teams have to throw it. It just kind of builds up on fantasy points a little bit. So Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, they're going to be starts for me this week. They should see plenty of targets. Lockett has a touchdown in 6 straight games, which I thought when I was looking at the matchup, I was like, I feel like Lockett's been scoring quite a bit. He has 6 straight games with a touchdown for Tyler Lockett. DK Metcalf, he's got touchdowns in back-to-back games. They've kind of closed up the gap here because for a while, Lockett was a production of 4 and a volume of 3, and DK was a production of 3 and a volume of 4. DK has hopped that production up over the last couple of weeks, so he's now tied up there with Tyler Lockett being a top 24 wide receiver. Absolutely love what these guys are doing right now. Geno Smith has made them more than fantasy relevant. Indianapolis, Minnesota, and this should be bounce back week for Indianapolis players because they're getting a Minnesota team that has been absolutely shredded by the passing game. I mean, Detroit lit them up last week at home, and now we've got Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce listed as starts here. Minnesota now allows the second most fantasy points to wide receivers after that game against Detroit last week. Pittman's going to be a start based on volume. Again, he gets top 12 targets right now at the position. Yeah, the production hasn't really met that, but he's still getting those targets. And if he gets those targets in this game, he should be able to do absolutely plenty of them. One thing that I noticed last week about Minnesota that I have mentioned in videos before, they give up big plays. I mean, we saw one to DJ Chark. We saw one to Jameson Williams. We saw those big plays to wide receivers throughout the day. That's where Alec Pierce wins his matchups. Now, Paris Campbell, to me, still might get a few targets, especially if Indianapolis has to do a little bit of back and forth with Minnesota or try to play catch up with them. We might see a decent amount of targets for Paris Campbell. But for me, when we talk about where are the fantasy points going to be made, Alec Pierce on those deep plays, I think that he secures at least one deep play, hopefully as a touchdown that makes him as a start this week. And then for the Minnesota Vikings, obviously Justin Jefferson will be a start, but Indianapolis does allow the second fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. So it is a little bit of a tougher matchup, but I do think TJ Hawkinson has himself another really good week. I think we see some Dalvin Cook this week. So JJ is going to be a start regardless of whatever the matchup is going to be. Hawk and Dalvin kind of after that. So for me, for Adam Thielen, it's more about does he score a touchdown? And I just don't think the opportunity for him to score in this matchup was as good as it was against Detroit. Baltimore and Cleveland, and it's hard for me to even list anybody as a start for Baltimore right now because we don't even know who the quarterback is going to be. Lamar Jackson obviously is banged up. Last week, Tyler Huntley went into the concussion protocol. Are we going to a third-string quarterback that was undrafted at this point? Now, nothing against undrafted quarterbacks, but are we really hinging our fantasy playoffs on that guy? Probably not. The Duve and Demarcus Robinson are both going to be sits for me. If for some reason, if we find out later in the week who it is, maybe we take a look at Demarcus Robinson, but it's really going to depend. And really, for me, it's more of like a risky wide receiver 3 option. Amari Cooper is going to be a start. Donovan Peoples-Jones is going to be a start. Now, maybe Watson's getting back to being his former himself. He looked a lot better this week than he has over the last couple of weeks, so he is starting to kind of work his way back. Maybe another game going up against a Baltimore defense that has struggled at times this year, but has been playing a lot better as of recent. We'll see what they bring against Deshaun Watson. Baltimore allows a lot of yards, but not a lot of touchdowns. So for me, kind of the highway to fantasy stardom this week for both of these guys are going to be those yards. Donovan Peoples-Jones has shown over the course of the season that he is more than capable of putting up big yards with big plays. Amari Cooper, we might have to hope for a little bit more volume for him to get there. So while the touchdowns might not be there for either guy, hopefully the yards are. Miami and Buffalo is going to bring me to my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. If you got any more Christmas shopping that you have to do, hurry up and finish that up at manscaped.com. Use code word headliners when you check out. You're going to get 20% off your entire order, and you're going to get free shipping. Lots of nice stocking stuffers that you can get from there. But this has got to be my must matchup, right? I mean, we've got number one, it's a division playoff game, or not a division playoff, a division game with playoff implications, I should say. Miami has been struggling as of recent, so to get back kind of on track against Buffalo would do them good. But just a talent of wide receiver here. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Stefon Diggs, and yes, Gabe Davis will go back to being a start for me this week. Let's talk about it. The Bills defense, in terms of stopping the pass, just isn't what it used to be. The Bills defense has allowed over 300 pass yards 4 times this season, and they've allowed over 200 yards 3 of the last 4 weeks. So for, even with the concerns that we've seen with Tua and with this offense and being a little inconsistent lately and just not really quite on the same page, this is a defense that isn't nearly as formidable as it once was. So the opportunity for him to get back on track this week will absolutely be there. Also, the loss of Von Miller for Buffalo, they're not creating as much pressure since that injury. So that is also going to give Tua maybe a little bit more time to find those open receivers. And one thing we know about Hill and Waddle, they both get open quite a bit. Now, Waddle, I think, is still a little bit banged up, and I think that may have been the reason we saw, him not really where he had been earlier in the season in this last game. But I do think we start to maybe see him catch back up over the next couple of weeks as he gets healthy again. Stefon Diggs, I mean, he's going to be a start. Of course, we don't sit Stefon Diggs. And then again, like I mentioned, Miami has an opportunity to get back on track in this matchup. And if that happens, and Waddle and Hill are both excellent, and they're able to run the football a little bit, and Tua looks good, and they're going toe-to-toe with Buffalo, Buffalo's going to have to take some shots, and that's where Gabe Davis comes in. I think that there are some big play potential in this game for Gabe Davis, and I really want to see him, rip off a couple over the top. And I think there's also one thing, too, that we've seen over the past week, and this is gut. This has nothing to do with numbers or anything. There has been some comments over the past week from media members who have said, does Buffalo have an offense that is capable to win in the playoffs? And someone even asked Josh Allen that. They said, do you think this offense is capable of winning a Super Bowl? And he just responded with, okay. I think we have a good opportunity to see this offense try to explode this week to say, hey, I think you guys should keep the stupid questions to yourself. Atlanta and New Orleans. Who's going to win the NFC South? It's really up in the air at this point. 4 teams, all with losing records, and really all of them have an opportunity. Even Atlanta, who's basically out of it at this point. Last game, London Drake London. London Bridge is falling down. Okay? My man, who has been up and down all season long, had his best career game in yards with 95 on 6 receptions and 12 targets. That's good to see. And now we're coming out of a bye, so hopefully we're moving in the right direction on getting the passing game moving a little bit more. My hope is is that Desmond Ridder, who will be starting this week, will be consistent enough to get him the targets he needs. Now, Marshawn Lattimore, 2 weeks ago, missed their game. Will he be back this week? That's going to be a big question. Will Marshawn Lattimore be back this week? If he is, and he's on Drake London, that could be a little bit of a tougher matchup, all right? We've seen London go toe-to-toe with some of the bigger possession-like wide receivers, a.k.a. Mike Evans. Does Drake London have a little bit of an issue this week because of that? It's quite possible. If Lattimore plays, Drake London is a guy that I'm actually a lot more concerned about, and that's why his score is only a 15. Now, Chris Olave is not someone that I'm worried about this week. Atlanta does allow the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers, and Chris Olave only has 3 touchdowns this season. So really, on a weekly basis, the ceiling has been a little bit lower than I think what we would like and what he's capable of. But he has over 60 yards in all but 4 games this season. And given a really good matchup here, I definitely think the 60 yards is in the pocket for him and a bigger game as well. Pittsburgh and Carolina, and as of right this moment, Kenny Pickett is still in the concussion protocol, which means Mitchie Biscuits is going to be the quarterback this week for Pittsburgh. And woo! That definitely helps DJ Moore a lot than George Pickens, that's for sure. So for Deontay Johnson, I'm pretty sure I just said DJ Moore, but DJ Moore plays for the opposing team, obviously. Deontay Johnson is the guy that I think gets helped out, and he has actually picked it up a little bit over the last couple of weeks. He's looking a little bit better. I've mentioned it before. His production has not been there by any means, but the volume continues to be there. Top 24 at the position in terms of targets per game. So he's getting peppered with targets, and that's what Trubisky is going to do, especially after all those interceptions last week. And with as good as the Carolina secondary can be, we saw it against Seattle. Let's get the ball out quickly. We don't want Mitchie holding it onto it too long. Let's get it to DJ. Let's get it out. I definitely think that we could see 6, 7, 8 receptions for DJ Johnson, for Deontay Johnson, DJ Johnson. I keep looking, and DJ Moore's name is right next to Deontay Johnson, and his name's highlighted in yellow because he's injured right now. So every time I look to it, my eyes just kind of gravitate to it, and I say DJ Moore. So Deontay Johnson for me. Decent amount of targets, decent amount of receptions. Yards are going to be kind of the thing. I don't know if he's going to score a touchdown. Really, for me, it's the hope of, can we get 80 to 100 yards this week for him? I think it's in the works. Pickens for me is going to be a sit, though, especially with Mitchell Trubisky. I'm not risking it with Pickens this week. DJ Moore. He's hurt right now. He had to leave last week. He ended up not coming back to the game. Haven't heard, as of this recording, hadn't really heard what the status of what of him was. So we'll cover that in the rankings video, and hopefully we get a little bit more information about that. Terrace Marshall, he's not going to be a start. Laviska Shenault is the only guy that I would kind of look at this week. And it's kind of the same reason that I talked about Deontay Johnson. Let's get the ball out fast. Let's get the ball out quick. Laviska Shenault getting peppered with targets. Pittsburgh allows the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And so for right now, I'm just going to kind of sit everybody because I really don't know what the word on DJ Moore is. But if DJ Moore is out this week, then Laviska Shenault is a guy that in PPR leagues, I'm probably going to look at starting. Philadelphia and Chicago. I mean, this game right here might set a record all time for most rushing yards in a game by quarterbacks with Justin Fields. With Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts. I mean, these guys could combine for over 200 yards together easy. They could be running all over the place. I'm going to roll with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. Dallas Goedert, the word is that he might be activated this week. There is no, as of this recording, guarantee that's going to happen. And even if he does, I don't know if he's fully 100% right now. So for me, I'm going to go back to Devontae Smith this week until Dallas Goedert. I see it, and he's like, okay, I'm healthy. He's back, ready to roll. Then at that point, I probably move Smith back to being a sit, and then we see Dallas Goedert start to get some more of those targets that he was getting before the injury. For the Chicago Bears, I mean, Philadelphia not only allows the 8th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, but they're injured at the wide receiver position, and none of them really have a whole lot of upside in this matchup. So yeah, we're just done with all of them. Kansas City and Houston does allow the 5th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, but we talk about this all the time. And the one difference between KC and maybe some of these other teams that they faced is KC doesn't really establish the run. They're throwing the football regardless of who it is. So this is one of those matchups where we really find out what the Houston secondary is made of. Are they fifth fewest fantasy points because they actually are pretty decent at holding opponents, or are they that way because everybody just runs all over them? We're going to find out this week, but I have a good feeling KC is going to be throwing the ball all over the place. Still going to go with Juju because of that, because they don't really establish that run, and they're not really a team that is going to rely on the run in a game like this. They're going to keep throwing it. Juju, I think, ends up getting his 10 points this week. I think Travis Kelce ends up getting back on track as well this week. Big games from both of them. One thing to keep an eye on, and I talked about this in What Just Happened video that we drop on Mondays all the time. The one thing I mentioned that kind of concerns me about Juju, and the reason I had to sit last week, is because Kadarius Toney. If Kadarius Toney is playing, if he's able to get back in there and active, then Juju at that point, he might become a sit for me, because I want to see how those two will be on the field together and how they kind of mesh those targets and things like that. So we need to keep an eye on that throughout the week. On the other side, KC allows the fourth most fantasy points to wide receivers, and I would like to start somebody here, but I don't even know who's healthy. Brandon Cooks missed last week. Nico Collins missed last week. Chris Moore had a huge game. So if Cooks and Collins are out, Moore is going to be a start for me, because he's going to see more than enough targets. But if Collins plays, if Cooks plays, one of those guys will end up being a start. We really just kind of have to wait and see. So hopefully in the rankings episode, I'll have a little bit more of an update for you on that. Dallas and Jacksonville, and the Cowboys are running it so much right now. That's actually killing some of the upside of the passing game, unfortunately. Lots of touchdowns to Zeke, lots of touchdowns to Tony Pollard. That leaves CeeDee Lamb as the main beneficiary, and really not a whole lot left over, because then you're getting those few extra targets left over that are really going to Dalton Schultz. So starting CeeDee Lamb, even against Jacksonville, against anybody, is always going to be something that happens. He's top 12 in fantasy points and targets, so he's definitely a guy that we're going to continue to roll with. But everyone else on this roster, especially considering James Washington is back now, is kind of off the board at the wide receiver position. And the Jacksonville offense is on fire right now. So we're going to start Christian Kirk and Zay Jones again. We're going to keep them both out there. Will the pressure get to Trevor Lawrence? So that's kind of the question. Can Dallas get home? Can they knock him around? Can they make him uncomfortable in the pocket? If we see that, then we're going to see, them struggle against Dallas a little bit. But if we don't see that, then Zay Jones and Christian Kirk should be just fine. So are we going to get the Dallas defense that looked mediocre against Houston last week? Or are we going to get the Dallas defense that basically made Indianapolis a laughingstock of the NFL 2 weeks ago? That's going to be the major player here, because if they don't get to Trevor Lawrence and knock him around, we might see another big performance out of him. Detroit and the New York Jets, my Lions, baby. Woo, they're looking good right now. But on the road against the Jets, this is a big one. To get to 500, a statement game. Are they going to be able to make it work? Jets allow the third fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. By this time, we all know the Jets defense is elite. They are a very, very good defense. So DJ Chark and Jameson Williams are both going to be sits for me, because they're both high risk, high reward plays. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown, they move him around and they do so much with him, and you hear me say this every week. He is matchup proof. He doesn't just sit out on the outside against one cornerback, and he's not just going to get shadowed by Sauce Gardner. It's just not going to happen. He's going to be moved all over. He's going to come out of the backfield. He's going to be lined up as like an H-back. He's going to be lined up, heck, on the end of the line sometimes. They move him all over the place just to get that mismatch with him. So for me, the targets are going to be there this week for him, because they won't necessarily be on the outside against these lockdown corners. But here's where things get interesting for me, because you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, DJ Chark, and Jameson Williams. You also have Josh Reynolds and Khalif Raymond. You have enough depth at the position right now to spread things out this week, to make sure that you've got guys that can play outside of Sauce Gardner, can play outside of everybody that locks people down. So while DJ Chark and Jameson Williams are going to be a sit for me, both of these guys, if they were to get into the slot for any in particular play, like Jameson Williams' touchdown last week, and really be matched up only on a safety or maybe a slot corner, and they don't have a whole lot of help over the top, a huge play could come out of this if they try to spread things out this week. And my hope is that they do, because I think that's going to be the key to beating the New York Jets. Now, Elijah Moore, for like the first time this season, is going to be a start for me. Detroit allows the second most fantasy points to wide receivers, and we saw it against Minnesota. I mean, on a more of a national stage game, you saw it against the Buffalo Bills. They are a bend, don't break defense, right? They are going to bend. They're going to let you cross the 50. They're going to let you get in the red zone, but then their key is to just kind of keep you from, at that point, scoring, make you kick a field goal, and that's how they really have been winning their matchups as of recent. So we'll see what happens with that. I mean, I think that Wilson and Moore are going to get enough yards to be starts this week. How many touchdowns? Does anything go to Tyler Conklin? Does Knight end up getting a rushing touchdown, even though they've been really good against the running game as of recent? The Detroit defense is just, I mean, the numbers show that they're really, really bad, but really in terms of upside, other than like Justin Jefferson, again, it's a bend don't break type offense for them. So sometimes you aren't seeing that upside that you would like to have. Arizona and Denver, and the Cardinals have two issues this week. Number one, they face a defense that allows the second fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. And the other problem is that Colt McCoy is now their starting quarterback. So what do we see from this offense? Well, I mean, Marquise Brown and DeAndre Hopkins are great enough wide receivers that we're playing them. Even with Colt McCoy, even with a tougher matchup, we just need to be expectant that that upside might not be there. Now, if you own DeAndre Hopkins, you're locking him in no matter what. We are not sitting DeAndre Hopkins for any reason whatsoever. If you have Marquise Brown, though, and maybe you've held him for a majority of the season when he was injured, and you have some other replacements that you've brought in during that time that you might be able to start, that might be where we start to talk about what players do we start over Marquise Brown. That is where things would get interesting in this matchup. The upside could be very limited this week, so just be prepared for potential letdown if you don't get the points that you're used to. For the Denver Broncos, Jerry Jeudy will absolutely be a start. I mean, what insane person would sit him after 3 touchdowns, right? But I mean, I said the same thing in the show last week. If Courtland Sutton were to not play for some reason, then Jerry Jeudy is an absolute must start for us. The same thing will hold true in this one. New England and Las Vegas, and New England's beat up right now. I mean, they are in a position where they're missing multiple wide receivers. So who's even going to be healthy this week? I mean, if we were to miss Devontae Parker, if we were to miss Jacoby Myers, if any of these things were to happen, then maybe Nelson Aguilar does become a start against Las Vegas. Maybe a little, I mean, Aguilar played in Las Vegas. Maybe a little revenge game here. Probably not. But with Nelson Aguilar, I mean, I'm going to have to say that, yes, if for some reason these guys are to miss, I've got to start Nelson Aguilar. Maybe not a high ceiling this week, but he's going to get targets for sure. Devontae Adams is the only start for Las Vegas. I mean, New England allows the 7th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. This offense is kind of up and down. We know Devontae Adams is going to get a ton of targets, and even in a tougher matchup, we're going to roll with him. Josh Jacobs has been so good as of recent that we're going to be running the ball against New England as well. So for me, it's only Devontae Adams this week. Tennessee and the Los Angeles Chargers, and maybe we take a look at Treylon Burks if he clears this week, but that's the big thing. If he clears. If he does, he is a potential start for me. But that's, again, where the rankings show is going to come into play, and you're going to have to watch that to see how high do we actually go with Treylon Burks. On the flip side, though, I am starting every wide receiver from the Los Angeles Chargers. I mean, Tennessee allows the most fantasy points to wide receivers. I mean, what I was so excited I was running out of breath. I had to catch my breath there to really get the excitement through the camera and to all of you. Keenan Allen, 88 or more receiving yards in 3 of the last 4 weeks. If you held on to him throughout the injuries, you are basking in the glory that is Keenan Allen right now, and that is why he is going to be my prize picks prop to play this week. I am going over the 67.5 yards that, as of this recording, Prize Picks has Keenan Allen at. So we're going to smash the over on that, and we're going to smash all 3 of these guys in our lineup. Cincinnati and Tampa Bay, and I mean, Chase is going to be the only start for me. Jamar Chase is going to be the only start for Cincinnati. I've got a feeling that T. Higgins isn't going to play. I mean, the dude, this is the second time this season that this has happened where he's gone out onto the field, played a snap, and then couldn't play the rest of the game. I just have a feeling that they're going to keep T. Higgins off the field this week because they're looking ahead to the future, right? They want to make a really strong playoff run, and T. Higgins being banged up for that is not going to help. So no T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd basically is week to week at this point as well. Doesn't sound like he'll be ready to go for at least a couple of weeks. So as of right now, Higgins and Boyd will be sits. Ja'Marr Chase will definitely be a start because it doesn't matter who's playing and who's not. We're starting Ja'Marr Chase. For Tampa Bay, Cincinnati allows the fourth fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. So if you start either Mike Evans or Chris Godwin, I'm going to need you to sign this consent form where you release me from all liability for telling you that these guys are starts. Now, Chris Godwin, he continues to see a ton of targets. He's still top 12 in targets right now. His production and Mike Evans' production last couple of weeks, their scores have dropped. And Mike Evans hasn't scored a touchdown since week freaking 3. But if you also watch the games, you've seen that he's had like 4 touchdowns called back during that time. So many big plays from Mike Evans have been called back for multiple reasons that if you take a look at his stats, he actually would have been fantasy viable over the last few weeks, but he keeps losing out on touchdowns and yards, especially big plays that it keeps happening. It's just so disappointing. Hopefully it doesn't happen in this game. Tampa Bay needs to get their stuff together. But Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, the problem is do you really have, if you start 3 wide receivers, do you really have anyone as a wide receiver 3 that you would start over them? If you only start 2 wide receivers, you're going to have to find someone that is a whole lot safer with about as much upside as these guys to also start as well. New York Giants, Washington Commanders, another division game this week that is going to have some playoff impact. For the Giants, Darius Slayton for me is more of a high-risk wide receiver 3 start this week. The volume has kind of been up and down. Richie James did score last week. I'm more excited for these guys when they play Minnesota next week than I am this week. I'm probably going to skip out on them. If I had to go with anybody this week, though, it would be Darius Slayton again. Terry McLaurin will be a start for me, and I hope you're listening right now and not just watching the video. So do me a favor, Headliner Nation, or not just reading the slides. Do me a favor, Headliner Nation, take a scroll through the comments, and if you see anybody make a comment about how they're not sitting Dotson this week and how crazy I am to sit Dotson or whatever, let them know, give them a little just F in the chat, because they clearly didn't listen, because even though that says a sit, I'm starting Jahan Dotson this week. It is happening. When he played the Giants 2 weeks ago before the bye, he did awesome. Touchdown, 80 yards or 60 yards, I think, looked great. We're going right back to him this week. The Giants have allowed over 200 passing yards in 3 of their last 5 games. They've been banged up in the secondary. They've been banged up on defense. I said it last week as well that that's been a little bit of a concern and hard to really navigate with the Giants because they were so good earlier in the season. We don't know how healthy they are at times right now. But Jahan Dotson is absolutely a start for me this week. I think the upside is absolutely there for him. He's more of like a low-end wide receiver 2 for me, but I am putting him in my lineup this week if I own him and I don't have any options that I would think would be safer than him. Let's wrap it up talking about the Rams and the Packers. And Baker Mayfield does make some of the Rams wide receivers maybe a little more fantasy relevant, but maybe in a better matchup. I'm not going to go with any of these guys this week going up against Green Bay. I'm just going to go ahead and skip on it. I would go Jahan Dotson, who I just talked about, over any of these guys, except Christian Watson. I'm still going to play Christian Watson. Lazard and Watson, I think they both have some nice TD upside this week. Christian Watson, I think, has the much higher ceiling than Allen Lazard. Allen Lazard is more of like a 4 catches, 50, 60 yards, and a touchdown type guy this week. But I do think both of them have the ability to find the end zone. But ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for my wide receiver analysis this week. Hopefully y'all enjoying the videos. Hit the like button for me. Subscribe if you're new here to the channel. And make sure you leave me some comments down below and leave some comments for those that, again, don't watch it because they say, why would you sit Jahan Dotson? I know there's going to be at least one of them, ladies and gentlemen. I know it. All right. Peace out, fellas and ladies. Hopefully everybody's having a great week. Hopefully y'all are feeling good for the playoffs. I'm going to get out of here. Stay safe and healthy. And I'll catch y'all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.